They had conquered 100 worlds without a single defeat. Their generals were legends, tacticians who had studied every species they crushed, predicting their every move before battles even began. Every opponent, no matter how strong, eventually fell to their relentless strategies. And then they met him. The war had been decided before it even started, or so they believed. Their fleet moved with precision. Their soldiers followed orders like extensions of the general's own minds. The enemy had no chance. They had never needed to adapt because no one had ever forced them to. But the first time they encountered him, their perfect system faltered. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible, a supply route disrupted before their forces could reinforce it, an ambush where none should have been possible. It was just one battle, an anomaly. That's what they told themselves. Then it happened again. And again. He didn't fight like the others. He didn't follow their rules. He saw their formations, their flawless execution, and he picked them apart like a predator dissecting prey. They'd always been the ones watching, anticipating, but now they were being studied. He was inside their heads before they even knew his name. The first true sign of fear came when an entire division vanished. The reports were impossible to believe. No distress signals, no bodies, just wreckage drifting in the void. The generals scoffed at the idea of a single strategist bringing down one of their elite forces. A mistake, they thought. A random failure. Until it happened again. Until their forces, their plans, started unraveling. They tried to adapt. They modified their tactics, adjusted their strategies, even changed the way their armies communicated. None of it mattered. He was already 3 steps ahead. Every time they thought they had outmaneuvered him, he was waiting for them at the end of their own trap. The war that should have been over in weeks stretched into months. It wasn't long before the whispers started. Their soldiers hesitated where they once charged without question. Their officers spoke of him like a phantom, a force that saw every move before it was made. The most disciplined armies in the galaxy began second-guessing their own leaders. The generals dismissed it as paranoia until the first of them fell. No enemy had ever eliminated one of their own tacticians. Their generals were untouchable, commanding from a distance, always shielded behind layers of security. But he had found a way. The fortress where the strategist resided had been hidden, protected, impossible to breach. Yet somehow, he had made it happen. One moment, the general was dictating orders. The next, he was gone. For the first time in their long, victorious history, they didn't just lose battles. They lost control. He wasn't a warlord, a conqueror, or a hero seeking glory. He was something far worse to them, someone who had figured them out. He had seen through their arrogance, the overconfidence that had built up after centuries of unchallenged dominance. And he exploited it without mercy. They threw everything at him. The most ruthless commanders, the most unpredictable formations, even suicide strikes meant to take him down at any cost. It was never enough. The harder they fought, the deeper he cut. But then, just when they thought they might finally corner him, when they believed they had found a pattern to his methods, he disappeared. No attacks, no traps, just silence. Days turned into weeks. Their forces advanced cautiously, expecting an ambush at every turn. But nothing came. It was worse than the battles. The waiting. The not knowing. The creeping realization that he wasn't running. They were. And then the first distress call came through. The distress call was fragmented, riddled with static and the unmistakable edge of fear. A forward command post one that should have been untouchable had gone silent. Before the transmission cut out, a single phrase slipped through the noise. He's already here. Panic spread like a virus through their ranks. No one knew where he would strike next, and that was what made him truly terrifying. He wasn't an army, wasn't a fleet they could track those. He was something else, something that turned their own war machine against them. Every supply line became a liability, every secure channel a potential weakness. The generals, for all their genius, found themselves trapped in a war they no longer controlled. Desperation forced them to change. They abandoned the arrogance that had defined them for centuries, finally admitting that they weren't just facing a strategist, they were facing someone who had studied them. And so, for the first time in their history, they chose unpredictability. Entire fleets abandoned their previous formations. Orders were issued and rescinded in rapid succession, and their forces were given free rein to operate as they saw fit. No more grand strategies. No more flawless execution. They would fight him with chaos. But chaos was his domain. Their soldiers, once disciplined and unstoppable, turned into something worse than incompetent. They became afraid. When a force no longer trusts its own leaders, no longer believes in the certainty of victory, it starts to unravel. It began with whispers in the lower ranks, hushed voices questioning orders that no longer made sense. Then it spread to officers, who started hesitating before issuing commands, unsure if they were walking into a trap. And then came the betrayals. Some of their own, driven by the suffocating fear of what was coming, abandoned their posts. Others surrendered without a fight, preferring captivity over the growing paranoia that he was already among them. The true breaking point came when a high-ranking commander defected not because he believed in the enemy's cause, but because he believed survival was impossible otherwise. The generals responded with ruthless efficiency. They executed deserters, restructured their remaining forces, and tightened their grip on the crumbling war effort. They forced their soldiers to fight, whether out of loyalty or sheer terror. But none of it mattered, because he was still there, watching, waiting, learning. They had thought victory was inevitable. Now, survival itself was in question. And then, in the dead of night, their most fortified world, the very heart of their war command, went dark. No explosions, no battle reports, no emergency signals. One moment, it stood as the seat of their power. The next, it was silent. The last message intercepted from the planet was a single word, barely more than a whisper. Run! The silence from their most fortified world was more than a loss, it was a message. The planet hadn't just fallen. It had been erased, its entire command structure wiped away as if it had never existed. There was no wreckage, no signs of battle, just absence. For the first time, the generals, the ones who had built an empire on perfect strategy and absolute control, found themselves powerless. Then the real horror began. Their networks, the lifeblood of their war machine, started turning against them. Orders were altered in transit. Reinforcements were redirected to empty coordinates. Entire fleets were fed false intelligence, lured into dead zones where no enemy waited, only silence, and the realization that they had been played. The war wasn't just being fought on the battlefield anymore. It was inside their own systems, inside their own ranks. They launched investigations, desperate to find the breach. At first, they suspected sabotage from within rogue officers, sleeper agents, anything that could explain the unraveling of their control. But the deeper they dug, the less sense it made. The intrusions weren't coming from defectors. They weren't even coming from the enemy. It was as if the very foundation of their empire had been rewritten without them noticing. Then, in a last-ditch effort to reclaim control, they shut everything down. No transmissions, no automated systems, every order had to be delivered in person, every movement dictated by trusted hands. For a brief moment, they thought they had finally severed his influence. And that was when they realized he had never needed their systems at all. The first outpost fell within hours. Without warning, without explanation, an entire regiment turned on itself. Officers executed their own soldiers. Warships, still docked, opened fire on their own fleet. When a recovery team arrived to investigate, they found something far worse than destruction. The bodies of those who had turned against their own kind were found with no signs of struggle, no indications of coercion. They had done it willingly. The generals ordered the recordings reviewed, hoping for an answer. What they saw was impossible. Their soldiers had received no new orders, no transmissions, yet one by one, they had turned, as if responding to a signal that no one had sent. It was no longer just a war of tactics. It was something else. Something deeper. And then, as the last of their defenses crumbled, a single message arrived. No encryption, no deception, just a direct transmission, sent to every remaining command post. A voice, calm and deliberate, spoke two words: Checkmate. Panic swept through the remaining command centers as the message echoed in their ears. It wasn't just a taunt, it was a declaration of finality. Checkmate. The war wasn't coming to an end. It had already ended. The realization sank in like a slow poison, and for the first time, the generals who had once controlled entire battlefields with precision found themselves as nothing more than pieces on a board someone else had mastered. In a desperate bid to salvage what little remained, they ordered their fleets to scatter. No more formations, no more coordination, just survival. Some ships attempted blind jumps into uncharted space. Others sought refuge in distant outposts, but no matter where they ran, they found the same thing waiting for them: silence. Their escape routes had already been mapped, their strategies anticipated. Every time they thought they had found a moment to breathe, the walls closed in again. Then the disappearances began. Entire command ships vanished, not destroyed, not even traced, simply gone, like they had never existed. The surviving officers could only listen to fragmented distress calls, cut off mid-sentence, followed by nothing. Not even wreckage remained. And yet, through it all, there was no army. No great invasion force. No sign of an overwhelming fleet moving in for the kill. Just the steady, calculated dismantling of their empire from the inside out. The last High Council convened in secrecy, their voices sharp with fear, their arguments frantic. This was no longer just strategy, it was something deeper, something they had never understood. Then came the final blow. One by one, their surviving strongholds activated their own self-destruct sequences. No warnings, no enemy infiltrators. Just command consoles lighting up with irreversible countdowns, as if the systems had decided they no longer deserved to exist. Those who tried to override the commands found their own security measures locked against them. Those who tried to escape found docking bays sealed shut, gravity fields locking them in place. The war they had started, the war they had believed they would win with ease, was now erasing them from history. In the last moments, as the final outpost awaited its destruction, the remaining officers gathered in silent acceptance. They had never understood their enemy, not really. They had studied tactics, probabilities, the art of war, but they had never studied him. He had fought a different war, one they had never been prepared for. And as the final seconds ticked down, they finally understood the message he had left them with. The war had never been about victory. It had been about proving a point. And that point had been made. Somewhere, far beyond the wreckage of an empire that once believed itself untouchable, a single figure stepped away from a console. No celebration. No speeches. Just quiet satisfaction. The game had ended exactly as he had known it would. He had never needed an army. Just a plan.